At about 7:15 in the morning on April 26, 2007, Sang-Hui Cho, referred to as the shooter hereafter, is on the fourth floor of West Ambler Johnson Hall on the campus of Virginia Tech. He is armed with a Glock 19 pistol. The shooter then enters the room of Emily Hilscher, who is alone in her room. The shooter pulls out his pistol and points it at Hilscher, who starts screaming and backs up under her loft bed. The screaming causes Ryan Clark, the RA, to wake up, and he rushes to Hilscher's room to see what the problem is. As he enters Hilscher's room, he is fatally shot once and collapses behind the door. The shooter then turns and fires a single shot at Hilscher, hitting her in the head, killing her as well. He then quickly leaves West Ambler Johnson Hall. Nobody has noticed him entering or leaving the building, and he returns to his on-campus residence a short distance away, where he will change his blood-stained clothes and shoes. In the next 2 hours, he will discard his computer's hard drive and mail a package to NBC containing his rambling manifesto, as well as various pictures and videos about the attack. Now, at about 9:40 in the morning, the shooter is on the second floor of Norris Hall. Before arriving on the second floor, he has chained the external doors of 3 main entrances shut. He has also placed a note on one of the doors saying that a bomb would go off if the door was opened. The shooter then enters classroom 200, which is empty, and gears up, wearing a fishing vest with fully loaded magazines for both of his pistols, the Glock 19 from earlier, and a Walther P22. The shooter then puts his backpack back on and goes down the hall, briefly looking into each classroom, likely to see how many people were in each classroom. When he reaches the end of the classrooms, just outside the men's restroom, the shooter sets his backpack down and pulls out his 2 pistols, carrying one in each hand. The shooter walks down the hallway and enters classroom 206. After entering, the shooter takes up a position next to the door and fires at students in the room, shooting many. The shooter then walks up to the professor, Dr. G.V. Loganathan, and fatally shoots him. The shooter then turns and briefly fires at students again before leaving the room and further down the hall. He fires at 2 fleeing students, injuring Jamal Carver with a shot to the arm. Carver and another student will manage to escape down the stairwell at the end of the hall. The shooter then fires at, but misses, a student and substitute professor in classroom 205 who are peering out from the door. He then enters classroom 207, fatally shooting Professor Jamie Bishop as he does. The shooter walks across the front of the classroom, shooting at students, some of whom have not had time to react. He kills 4 students, Lauren McCain, Michael Pohl, Maxine Turner, and Nicole White, in addition to Professor Jamie Bishop. He also injures 6 others, Caitlin Carney, Jarrett Evans, Alida Habtu, Sean McQuaid, Derek Odell, and Kevin Stern. 2 students are uninjured. The shooter then leaves the room. As he does, he encounters 2 professors, Kevin Granata and Wally Grant. He immediately fires at Professor Granata, killing him with a shot to the head. The shooter then fires at Professor Grant, wounding him with a shot to the back. He takes refuge in the men's restroom next to where the shooter set down his backpack. The shooter then notices Professor Jocelyn Kotornowak looking from the doorway of classroom 211 and immediately approaches it. Professor Kotornowak goes back inside the classroom and alerts everyone to get down on the floor. She and student Henry Lee try to barricade the door with students' desks. The shooter enters classroom 211, pushing past the desks. He turns and fatally shoots both Lee and Professor Kotornowak, who fall behind the door. Student Matthew Laporte runs across the front of the room to try and tackle the shooter. The shooter turns and fires several times, and Laporte collapses shortly before reaching the shooter. The shooter then goes down the aisles of the desks, shooting on both sides at hiding students. The shooter then leaves the classroom. He goes across the hall and returns to classroom 206. Survivors have attempted to hide under the desks and are playing dead. As he enters classroom 206, the shooter walks across the front of the room, shooting at more students. The shooter then leaves the classroom and goes across the hall. He attempts to re-enter classroom 207, but surviving students are holding the door shut. The shooter fires a few times through the door, which doesn't injure anyone. He then goes farther down the hallway and attempts to enter classroom 205. The professor and students have barricaded the door with a table and are holding it in place. The shooter fires a couple of times, not injuring anyone. Nobody will be injured in this classroom. The shooter crosses the hallway and attempts to enter classroom 204, in which all but 3 students have jumped out of the windows. Professor Livru Librescu is holding the door closed. The shooter overpowers Professor Librescu, killing him with a shot to the head. He then crosses the room, fatally shooting Manal Pinchal in the head. The shooter then approaches two students, Nathaniel Webster and Justin Klein, shooting both of them at close range. Both will survive. The shooter then leaves the room and goes back down the hall, returning to classroom 206. He continues to shoot at students who are playing dead and hiding. In total, he has killed 9 students: Brian Bloom, Matthew Gwaltney, Jeremy Herbstritt, Jarrett Lane, Partahi Lumbachuam, Juan Ortiz, Julia Pride, Waleed Shalan, and Daniel O'Neill, in addition to Professor Loganathan. He has injured an additional 2, Guillermo Coleman and Chang Min Park. 2 students are uninjured. The shooter leaves and goes farther down the hall, returning to classroom 211. In the same manner as before, he walks down the aisles of desks, shooting at students who are playing dead. In total, he has killed 11 students: Ross Alamadine, Austin Cloyd, Caitlin Hammerin, Rachel Hill, Matthew Laporte, Henry Lee, Daniel Perez, Aaron Peterson, Mary Reed, Rima Samaha, and Leslie Sherman, in addition to Professor Kotor Nawak. He injures an additional 6 students: Allison Cook, Colin Goddard, Emily Haas, Christina Heeger, Heidi Miller, and Hillary Strollo. There's a single student uninjured. At this point, the shooter can hear the police in the building, and he looks out of the door briefly. The shooter then closes the door and fires a single shot at Matthew Laporte, who is already dead, striking him in the head. The shooter then turns and faces the windows, killing himself with a shot to the left temple.